for a human to see a pattern, you really only need like 1 to 3 events to happen.
Yeah.
It happened with Matt Walsh when he got asked on the Rogan show,
how would you describe your political ideology? And
depending on the space that I'm in and who I'm arguing with, I either come off as like center right to like far left. There are some things that I guess you could say I'm like center right or right on. So I've always been a big fan of guns. I'm a huge fan of self-defense. I'm a big proponent of capitalism. I'm not like a socialist or communist in any size, shape, or form. Center left views, though, I like very much believe in the strength and integrity of U.S. institutions. I think they should be supported. I stand the absolute heck out of them. I'll fight tooth and nail for people that want to attack the NIH, the CDC, the FDA, et cetera, et cetera. And then for far left stuff, like on my social positions, like I'm pretty far left. Like I generally support like trans people, most LGBT things. Yeah, it just depends on where you're at. I'm a little bit all over the place, but I would say like moderately on like center left to far left. And then the reputation I have is kind of as a I'll confront people that have opposing views of me for discussion or debate, depending on the platform.
Yeah, I'm sure you've encountered this to an enormous degree, that anyone who has the slightest hint of unorthodox views is either a psyop, grifter, controlled opposition, shill. There's a list of slurs, and I'm actually someone who's greatly in favor of ideological self-segregation. But one of the cost of this is, unless you pass some kind of weird purity test, you're immediately regarded as outgroup. And it's also kind of interesting because there's an understanding that humans are often self-contradictory, inconsistent, but it's always regarded as in the most nefarious way possible. And it can't be reduced to simply like this person just has a different perspective than I do.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why that is. The two big ones off the top of my head are, one is generally if somebody tells me that they're kind of like centrist or they've got like a lot of different political views, 9 times out of 10, that person is conservative, just masquerading as a centrist because they don't want the label. So I can understand why people don't trust it. I'm very sympathetic towards that view. There are a lot of people like Dave Rubin, for instance, that'll be like, oh yeah, like I'm a liberal, like I'm still centered, but like ostensibly, every single thing they defend, they're going to defend Trump on every single decision they make. They're going to constantly attack any left-leaning establishment, any left-leaning position. The Nazis were actually, socialists because it says National Socialists, and Democrats were the slave owners and blah, blah, blah. So I can understand why people are reticent to embrace somebody that has like a smattering of political positions or, describe themselves as center-leaning. I don't trust those people. I don't even like to describe myself as center-leaning or like a centrist for that reason. And then I think a second thing that happened is I think that it's okay for people to be tribal. Like it's a pretty human thing to look at people around you and then feel good about them supporting you and validating you. Like that's probably an essential and integral part of like human existence. But I think that only works when the groups are pretty small. So like, for instance, if you've got like small communities and cities or whatever that all kind of like have similar sets of beliefs, that makes sense. Like I'm from Nebraska. My guess is going to be that most Democrats in Nebraska are going to be warmer towards guns than Democrats living in like Southern California. But the problem is the groups in the world have expanded to encompass everything, so that there's like, we try to fit everybody into like 2 groups in the United States because the obsession right now is at the federal level. Probably less than 15% of young people know who like their governor is or their mayor is, unless you live in Texas, Florida, California. But I bet 95% of people know who AOC is, even though she has no impact on the local politics. So yeah, I think it's the fact that people will mask their political position sometimes so that they get credit for being center leaning because it makes it seem objective. And then the fact that the political groups we're in have gotten so big that there are now so many different political labels that you have to pass to have like this litmus test of being in that group.
Well, I think it's also so much the case, and I don't think this is necessarily a recent phenomenon, is a lot of people are told since childhood that it's very important that you pick one of these tribes. And then a large part of their identity, at least in terms of politics, is spent defining themselves as a member of this tribe and defending said tribe, even if the positions are self-contradictory, or if the positions flip within a few years, you'll have the corporate press be there to feed them talking points about why it's not a contradiction to be to support Bill Clinton when he bans gay marriage, and then to regard him as this great gay rights pioneer, and not even bat an eye because he's obviously one of the good guys as opposed to those evil Republicans and they're the bad guys.
Yeah, Yeah, there are definitely issues with that. I try to think of a left leaning and a right leaning example when I give examples for things, so that I'm being fair. But like the biggest thing that sticks out for me that's unbelievable to me is I have my mother and my father both did Air Force, and I remember when I was a child, my mother cried when she was talking about the Monica Lewinsky proceedings, and she was trying to say, Stevie, you don't understand. Like when I go and I sign into work every day, like the commander in chief, the head of my armed forces, is somebody that is a womanizer, somebody that abuses women and blah blah blah. And that was she felt so strongly about that. And man, when all the stuff about Trump leaked and the way that he talks about women and treats women, she was like, well, Stevie, sometimes boys will be boys. And what are you going to do? And it's like, why were you okay with it here and not here? Or seeing like the big flip, for instance, on I'm doing two conservative examples. Seeing the big flip on Russia was a really big one, too. I don't think my parents have ever said the word Russia or China in their entire life. It's always Soviet Union and Chi-Coms. That's how far away. Because my mom grew up in the Cold War. She flew the Looking Glass mission. And when she was in the Air Force. And to have them be like kind of warmish or not as cold on Russia now, and they're kind of like, it's just such a weird thing to see how quickly people's positions change. It's like we've always been at war with Oceania stuff from 1984.
Yeah, I think there's also something, and I hear your thoughts about this. I think the corporate press creates a sense of perpetual present in people's consciousness. And it parallels very much like soap operas, where maybe I'm a little bit older than you. There was a show called Dynasty in the 80s, and Michael Carrington, who's the son of Alexis and Blake, at one point he rapes a character named Colby. And then like the actor was popular. So like 2 years later, he's marrying her, and they just pretended this whole rape thing never happened. And you'll have a lot of these narratives that happen in...
Wait, can you... Hold on, I'm sorry. I think I totally missed it. They like raped him in the show or in real life?
No, in the show. Like the character raped another character, and then 2 years later they got married, and they like basically pretended he didn't rape her. Like it's just like...
and they got married in the show.
Yeah, in the show.
Okay,
yeah.
sorry. Okay, got it. I got really confused. Okay, go
ahead. The point is the media has these narratives that often are just tangentially related to reality. Even if so, they're not provide the context of like, wait a minute, 2 years ago, this person had the opposite perspective, or we as the media had the opposite perspective. An easy example to counter your maybe conservative examples is, I'm not taking a Trump vaccine. I don't trust anything that comes out of this administration. And then 5 months later, if you don't take this vaccine, you should be, out on the street and read out of polite society. I'm curious if you think this is something that is getting worse, getting better. Is there anything we can do or anything we should do?
This is like, oh man, when I talk to people, there's just like a few things that I wish people could understand. And I think it would like equip all of us to navigate political stuff a lot better. There's a huge myth that people have. And I understand why. We're humans. We're cool. We dominate the planet. We can observe ourselves. We've got great minds or whatever. The human brain is not fundamentally a truth-seeking machine. That's not what we're oriented towards. Yeah, we're oriented towards things that make us feel good and the things that satisfy us. And that sometimes that runs in the face of what is true. And I wish people would realize that, because sometimes people think that they're on these huge missions for truth, but in reality, they're engaging in cognitive bias after cognitive bias and just like finding things that affirm and validate their worldview while simultaneously discrediting everything outside of their worldview. Like, I don't trust that guy. He's part of this organization. Or like, there are so many people that I'll hear say things like I don't trust the mainstream media. Like they get paid by blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, well, how much money does Alex Jones or Tim Pool or me get paid to like sell you a certain political opinion? Like, why would you necessarily trust us anymore? Why would you trust any alternative media any more than necessarily anybody in the mainstream media, right? Like all of the same problems that exist there in one way or another exist in alternative media, sometimes in an even greater fashion because there's less oversight. So, I wish that people would understand that. And then the second thing, everything else I wish are just like pipe dreams. I wish people wouldn't fight with themselves so much over like minor disagreements. Oh God, there's a good quote, but I can't remember it. But it's like the worst enemy to like a leftist is like somebody that's like slightly not the same leftist as them. But it's true on the conservative right as well. You wrote up Milo, and if you look in those groups, like all of those guys are fighting with each other and hate each other too. We have to do a much better job at communicating with each other while also assuming that we're not coming from the worst place possible too. Like I don't like for instance, I'm a big proponent of vaccines, and if you want to have that fight, we can have that fight. But I'm assuming that the majority of people that are anti-vax mandate and and even maybe don't trust the mRNA vaccines, I assume for most of them, it's coming from a place of like worry about potential side effects, about desire to maintain freedom and integrity of their own body and persons. And, that's okay. We can have that discussion. And then I would hope on the right that they would assume that like, okay, well, people on the left are looking at like, what's the best social good? Like what's the best for public health for people that can't protect themselves? But the problem is that's not the case. People on the left assume that people on the right, are, willingly wanting people to die because they hate scientists and blah, blah, blah. And then people on the right are assuming that people on the left are, just trying. It's like Rush Limbaugh. The Democrats are always looking for a reason to steal your freedoms and encroach on your life and force you to do things and submit to the deep state. And it's overwhelming. Yeah.
Kind of, I want to hear your thoughts on kind of this siloization of America, where different groups aren't even talking to one another. You're going to have there's a big population that gets all its news directly from Fox News. You're going to have some equivalent, maybe from the New York Times, and it's really hard to kind of bridge the gap because they're at the very least not even receiving the same data.
Yeah, I think I've read this academically. These are called epistemic bubbles, where you have certain friends. You subscribe to certain social media feeds, and without even doing anything bad, like you're not committing epistemic fallacies personally. You haven't like gone out of your way to act in an improper manner without necessarily doing anything bad. All of a sudden, you're living in a totally different reality than somebody else. Something I say before that ties into the first thing: humans are not fundamentally truth-seeking machines. For a human to see a pattern, you really only need like 1 to 3 events to happen. Yeah. Like if you're talking to a guy and he's like, bro, I am so over Indian people in New York, chances are that guy had 1, maybe 2 bad experiences with an Indian person. And that's enough for the billion plus Indian people. Like, boom, I'm done with them, or look at like the BLM stuff, like how many violent cop killings, or suspect killings can I show you in a year before it's a big problem? Some people would say that like if I showed you 1 a week, is that a problem? It feels bad, right? 52 a year, that feels unbelievable. But do you even know how many cops are in the country? Do you even know how many, interactions there are between police and perpetrators? Do you expect suspects? Do you expect the number to be 0? Is that realistic, right? Is 1 too many? Is 20 too many? Is 100 too many? Like, people don't even have in their head like a mind for any of these issues. You ask, it happened with Matt Walsh when he got asked on the Rogan show, how many kids do you think are on puberty blockers? And he's like, I don't know, millions. And I'm like, bro.
Wait, did he really say millions?
If we're talking about the drugs, millions.
How many people have had this done?
Depends on what. I don't think we have exact numbers, but if we're talking about the drugs, millions.
Millions? How did you do a whole documentary on this? And you're like 4 orders of magnitude off. Millions of kids on puberty blockers? Millions?
You're talking about hormone blockers?
Yeah.
Millions of kids have been on hormone blockers? Really?
I'm sure someone's going to fact check me on that, but my guess is that we're into the millions now at this point. Yeah.
You know what? I actually am glad he said that. That is your guess. That truly shows what your state of mind is and how disconnected you are from reality, if that's what you feel, right? I like asking engaging questions like what is the percentage of people that you think are this? And somebody's like, 98% of people probably feel this way. And it's like, okay, well, we looked at the data and it's actually like 12%. I think you're a little bit disconnected, buddy. Millions of children on puberty blockers?
It says over the last 5 years, there were at least 4,780 adolescents who started puberty blockers and had a prior gender diagnosis.
This says it's kind of undercounted, but
that would be a big undercounting.
Less than 1,000 people a year.
Yeah.
Americans think 21% of the population are transgender? That can't. What? He said millions. Yeah, and I'm like, bro, that number is like, it's like 1,000 a year, maybe. It was just an unbelievable answer. You ask people on the left, how many unarmed black people do you think are killed by cops every year? And like, I don't know, 1,000, 5,000, hundreds. And it's like the answer is like 12. It's way, 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 way smaller than anybody thinks. That Sound of Freedom movie is out, and I saw some numbers. We were on stream, and I saw a number posted on the website, and it was like, in the United States, 500,000 children go missing each year. I'm like, 500,000?
That's not possible.
True. More than 500,000 children a year go missing in the U.S. alone. Wait, what? Wait, where does this number come from? A child goes missing every 40 seconds in the U.S., over 2,100 per day. In excess of 800,000 children are reported missing each year. Another 500,000, reported missing. So this means like a kid could run away, go reported missing, and then come back like the next day or something, huh? Yeah, that's a huge number. I'm like, I have a rough idea of population estimates, but the number is actually 500,000 are reported missing. So like, if your child runs away, you call the cops, and then like you find them like a day later. That's like counted in that number, right? Like 98% of those are resolved within like a few days, But people,
And then then you already know the response is, oh, you're saying 98% resolved, so it's not a problem. So like immediately the heuristic is just like, anytime someone tries to have any perspective, what they hear is you're trying to dismiss this as an issue, and it doesn't really exist as a problem.
Yeah, because the facts aren't really important. The facts are just proxies, essentially, for moral positions. And when you argue against any of the facts, people feel like you're arguing against the moral position.
Yes.
I don't think we should have homeless people in the United States, but if I argue against rent control, because I think rent control is a shitty policy, people are like, oh, so you're pro-homelessness? It's like, no, what the fuck? There was a lady, I don't even think she's a real person, but there was somebody on Twitter the other day, like 2 days ago, at a Lulch or something, where she tweeted out a bunch of pictures of an innocent woman that got attacked in France by a group of like a dozen North Africans for dressing improperly. And the picture, it's like 5 pictures of a woman with a bunch of scars on her face, or stitches, not scars, stitches from wounds and everything. So she says, a dozen of North Africans tried to assassinate a 19-year-old model in Toulouse, France this past Wednesday because she wasn't dressed properly. Her name is Anissa. When they started to follow her, she had no idea what was happening. They broke her nose, stabbed her, and disfigured the young woman, having to receive more than 50 stitches throughout her body. Since most of them are minors, this attempted francocide will not have harsh consequences for the aggressors, while the young Anissa will bear a lifelong trauma. Okay, but it seems like, 1, it wasn't a dozen North Africans, it was 4, number 1. Number 2, we don't know why the fight exactly started or which words exactly were exchanged, because it sounds like they got into an argument before they actually started fighting. 3, it seems like she did know what was happening. It's not like she was just randomly jumped. There was like a fight, words were exchanged before any fighting happened. And then 4, the victim herself is from North Africa, so the protect our natives from immigrants doesn't even make sense here. It was an immigrant who was attacked. Oh, and assassinate is a crazy word to use here as well. Assassinate is an insane word to use here. It doesn't seem like anyone knew each other before the scuffle. And yeah, that was her story. And I did like 5 minutes of research. It wasn't a dozen North Africans, it was 4. The lady wasn't alone. She was with a group of friends. We don't know if it was because she was dressed improperly. Everybody was leaving a party and drunk, and I pointed this out. I was like, and also the lady herself was a North African. It wasn't like an immigrant attacking a native. It was North Africans, right? Now, none of this is to excuse what happened, but like, as soon as I tweeted, like, why not get the facts right? People are like, oh, so you think it's better to get beat up by 4 North Africans instead of 12? And I'm like,
oh,
no,
so you don't care if women get assaulted? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, come on, bro. Like, are you saying, like, if it's bad, and there are things that are bad, report it accurately. Like, it's bad on its own. You don't have to make shit up, because as soon as you make shit up, now people are going to look at you, they're not going to trust anything, Right. And yeah, it's just it's so frustrating that we live in I don't want to say like the post-fact world, but like, because honestly, humans are always post-fact. Like you said, we have moral intuitions, and then we ad hoc, we rationalize them. Facts are always proxies for just like moral feelings. Like, I can predict like 95% of what a person thinks just by like, do you support Donald Trump, or do you support Andrew Tate, or are you vaccinated? Like, I can start to guess all of their political positions, because they're all just like proxies for the groups, that we belong to, or did you support like, the BLM movements, or are you pro-vax, or did you support Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren? Right, you can predict so many moves. So it's just
I'll give you an example from left and right to kind of go along with what you're saying. You hear one of the things I disagree with very heavily with conservatives is when they're talking about how the budget's too high, the deficits are too high, and it's like, look, if you want to cut these programs and you think the programs are counterproductive or a waste of money or evil, that's fine. Like, this is just your excuse to get to that result that you want, because they'll talk about, okay, the debt's $20 trillion. It's like, okay, what number is too much, and how are you getting to that number? Can we handle 100 trillion? Can we handle 1? I always point out, in the 1970s, Barry Goldwater, who's literally called Mr. Conservative, wrote Conscious of a Conservative. He had a book called The Coming Breakpoint, and he's talking about how in the 70s, if deficits continue as they're going, America is going to have to default and it's going to go bankrupt. Reagan comes along, the deficits go through the roof, the debt goes through the roof, and here we are. I'm not saying we're in economic nirvana, but the point is we have not economically collapsed. We're not even at Great Depression levels. The debts are still going up. Now, what they're going to hear is, oh, so you're saying we can have debt permanently? No, I'm just saying that if you're saying 20 trillion is too high, that's a huge number. Where are you getting the number where it's a problem? Yeah. And for the left, the other answer is teachers should be paid more. Okay, you can't write more in a check. Like, what is the rate that teachers should get, and how are you determining that number? Is it double, triple, 10 times? And there's no answer. The answer is whatever they're paid, they're not getting paid enough, and they're getting paid more. But again, that doesn't get you to an actual salary, which is what the whole discussion is about. It's just a direction.
Mm-hmm. I think U.S. debt for conservatives, that's like their version of climate change.
Yes,
where
yes.
people on the left for a long time have like, the whales are all going to be dead, like no more polar bears, the planet's going to, hellscape over, it's going to freeze over, it's going to blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I saw the Gore stuff and it's like, it is getting hotter. I do think climate change is a problem, but it's probably not as dramatic as they said. And now we're like, well, was it? Do we believe them at all? And then for conservatives, it's the same thing. Next year, we're going to default on all of our debt and we got to buy Bitcoin because the USD is going to be fucking worthless and blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying, okay, like, come on. And if you guys really felt this strongly, like, why is it that every time we get a goddamn Republican president, they fucking run these deficits up more than the Democrats sometimes? It's insane, Like Trump spent so much money. Why?
But that's always the Democrats' fault.
Is it?
Well, they always say that. It's like, what do you want him to do? He only had 51 senators, blah, blah, blah. It's like, there's never, I always point this out, there's never an attempt by Republicans when they're in, DeSantis in Florida is a good example. He has supermajorities. He's not cutting the budget. The budget's increasing year to year. Now, you could say it's a good thing. You can say that this is going toward functional ends. Florida's doing great, all these other things. Point being, clearly this is a case where you can spend more every year, and this is not having this kind of catastrophic consequences that you are portending in other contexts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then when Republicans get in, they always want to cut taxes. They don't pair it with spending cuts, and it's like, I mean, what do you think is going to happen? It's dumb.
What is your kind of biggest source of frustration in contemporary discourse, especially on the internet?
It has to do with the epistemic bubbles that we spoke about. The epistemic bubbles and the echo chambers. The fact that like people live in completely different realities today, and the groups have gotten so huge. There's like 2 or 3 huge political factions in the United States that every single person belongs to. Like, I'm pretty sure at this point you can be in like rural Oklahoma and somebody's going to walk up to you and say, what do you feel about Leah Thomas? And it's like, it's just gotten so absolutely insane in the United States how big and all encompassing these political groups are, how much it permeates every single facet of our lives, all of the apps on our phones, all of the games we play, the movies, everything. I wish that there was just a way to kind of like bring the two worlds back in alignment with each other, because the frustrating thing is, like, there's so many good conversations that just don't happen because we're so like hyper polarized. Most of the research I've done recently or over the past few years has been vaccines. So that's why my mind goes back to a lot.
Okay, sure.
I think there's a lot of really, really, really good conversations to be had about what does a vaccine mandate look like, or at what stage do we need one, or do we need one ever? Like, there's a lot of good conversations there, but instead people take up like the most ridiculous positions. Like on the left, it'll just be, whatever the government says, we've got to do it and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, clearly like that's not workable politically, and most people aren't going to be on board with that. On the right, it'll be like, well, I'm never in favor of a mandate ever. And it's like, bullshit. If there was a virus that was killing 50% of children in the country, Republicans would be first in line telling everybody they need to get vaccinated, But there is an interesting conversation, like how deadly does a disease need to be before this is like a public health issue that becomes mandated, or we excise people from society, But those conversations never happen. Instead, it's like, was this a Chinese manufactured bioweapon? Are Republicans a death cult? It's just like, yeah. And on every single issue that we talk about, it's like there are so many potential good conversations that can happen. It could be about trans stuff. It could be about immigration. It could be about deficit spending. And instead, it's just like the Democrats want to do this and destroy your life, and the Republicans want to do this to destroy your life. And it's like, okay, well, if that's where the conversations are over here, then we're not getting any farther on any of these issues.
Well, I think part of the anti-vax frustration is the fact there was enormous asymmetry in terms of the feasibility of having one's views heard. I'm sure you remember very vividly, if you have certain unorthodox views, whether they're complete crazy lies, such as COVID doesn't exist, or things that are more like, wait a minute, this possibility, this is a lab leak, let's look into this. Both of these views were treated kind of as identically and being heavily censored, by various tech organizations. So that doesn't even speak to the kind of the facts of the matter or the arguments. I think a lot of the frustration is we're not even being allowed to have this discussion to begin with.
Yeah, something that I'm happy about, I wish this would have happened sooner, was I think that the mass attempt at censoring certain conversation was probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
I think a lot of social media companies in the past several months or few months, I think, have finally started to roll back on those policies. Like, I think on YouTube now you can discuss like anti-vaxxer stuff, or I think people that deny the election, you can talk about this stuff again. You just got like a little warning pop up. I think that's a good middle ground. I wish we would have discovered that sooner. I like the little pop ups where it's like, hey, if you want more information about this, read here. It happens on Twitter. It happens on YouTube. Yeah, but I think there's an argument to be made potentially for censoring some types of conversations. I'm sure we could think of some, but when 40% of the American public believes it, that is a conversation that has to happen, right? You can't just sweep it under the rug and assume that 80% of the conservative movement in the United States is going to disappear and we don't have to worry about it. That's an insane position to take. And if you live in a country where every single person in the United States, Bill Gates and the crackhead down the street that lives outside the gas station both have one vote in this country. They both have the exact same amount of voting power. If we're going to entrust every single citizen to vote, we'll be able to talk about, whether they think COVID came from a Chinese weapons lab, or whether they think that, the immigrants on the border are going to come and invade the country and replace white people. Like, we might as well have the conversation if we can all vote on the same shit, Yeah.
But I would disagree a little bit, because I don't think it's an insane position. I think it's an outdated position, because if you look at maybe when you and I were kids, or a little before that, you had 3 networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. And if they wanted certain views not to be regarded as part of the mainstream or part of the national conversation, they had that power to basically make that happen and to vanish entire schools of thought. With the rise of talk radio and Limbo in particular, you had kind of these more unorthodox from the, kind of what had previously been regarded as orthodox position. And now with the rise of social media, like literally anyone with a tinfoil hat, and as we're speaking, Alex Jones's tinfoil hat is on the wall behind those doors, can have their point of view expressed. But I think they're still thinking of it in terms of that 1970s vision, where like, okay, we have these 3 levers, and between that we can kind of navigate what's the Overton window, whereas they don't realize how much technology has passed them by.
Yeah, possibly that there are ways where conversations are going to happen whether you like it or not. Right. Although we did like a thing that we did like this, where we started off with like, all the corporate media, and then stuff started to expand, and then we got like the World Wide Web. And the internet isn't very much like a web anymore, where it's a bunch of like little places that are all connected via,
it's a series of tubes.
Not even that. It's actually kind of regressed back to, I know what you're referencing, yeah, but it's actually kind of regressed back to being like 4 or 5 different institutions.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, which is unfortunate. Like, it used to be back in the day, like if you were to use Google, you're looking across like the entire internet for, I want to find information about this thing. But now, really, Google is just kind of the most expensive archiving website for Wikipedia, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, Quora, Stack Overflow. There's like 10 sites on the internet that are just basically indexed by Google, and that's basically what you're searching for every time you look up an answer, the Mayo Clinic. Yeah. So, unfortunately, I think we have almost wrapped back around where censorship can actually, it is damaging how much you can delete people off the internet. There are alternative ways to express it, but depending on how hardcore you get deleted, it's really hard to overcome that.
I have no idea what you're going to say to this. So I'm extremely curious to hear your answer. What is your view on Robert Kennedy and his campaign, and how it's being handled both by the media apparatus and social media in general?